Hi, welcome to The Witch in the Woods, and today let's talk about the magical use of runes. Now, there was somewhat of a popular revival of the runes, and I would say this happened about the 1980s. When writers brought into the mainstream a lot of runic and heathen revival literature, and this kind of were the writers like Ralph Blum, who brought out the Book of Runes, and also people like Edred Thorson or Stephen Flowers, who started publishing their works on magical runes about this time. To many of us, this is what we know about magical rune use, and it's got to be said that in scholarly circles you cannot really talk about a serious study of the runes and bring up such sort of new age nonsense as their magical power and their magical sound. So it became quite unpopular to associate any part of magic with serious scholarly rune work. It's also been questioned whether the runes were ever used magically in historical context, or whether this is something that was brought in modern times, possibly a few centuries ago, and something that's been built on and elaborated over time. So this is the subject I'd like to discuss today, is what do we know about the magical use of runes in their original 8th to 10th century use. Well, rune scripts appeared around about the 1st or 2nd century, which led many people to believe that they were based originally on the Latin alphabet. There are many letters that are similar to a Latin alphabet, and so it's presumed that the Germanic tribes created their own system of writing at this time. The reason being that some of the vowel sounds that were in Germanic language, some of the consonant sounds, could not be faithfully recreated by using a Latin alphabet, and so they invented their own, with some different letters to reflect their own language. Now, there are theories that the runes are older and that the origin goes much deeper, but to be honest, we can only find them recorded from about the 1st and 2nd century. So there doesn't seem to be any evidence that they're much older than that. We base a lot of what we know on the Anglo-Saxon rune poems and the Anglo-Frisian, as they're called, runic alphabets. First we've got to understand how many different varieties of runes there are. So there was the Elder Futhark, which was used around about the 1st, 2nd to about the 5th century, and this had 24 letters. Then around about the 5th century the runic alphabet split and they went off in 2 separate directions. One was in the younger Futhark, which lost a lot of the letters and reduced the original alphabet down to 16 letters. The other way it went was into the Anglo-Frisian runic alphabet, the runic script, and this actually added letters, it added vowel sounds, it added new symbols, and increased on the original 24 letter runic alphabet. So because there was simply more information about the Anglo-Saxon runes, and especially from the Anglo-Saxon rune poems, everything that we tend to write about in the modern era comes from this Anglo-Frisian Elder Futhark, built on by a later edition of these rune poems. Now, these rune poems gave us meanings not only for the names of the runes, but for how to understand these runes and what we can gain from a meaning for these runes. There's sort of 2 or 3 lines of a kenning which leads us to understand what the rune's meaning is. Now, because of these strange enigmatic kennings, and because of the origin of the rune, which of course were retrieved by Odin by hanging on the tree of Yggdrasil, and from this initiation and this sacrifice, the wisdom that he retrieved was actually the runes. It has always been presumed that the runes had great magical association. But can we actually prove any of this? Were the runes used in a magical context, or were they simply used as a form of writing to represent sounds that weren't used every day in the German language? Well, the Anglo-Saxon or the Anglo-Frisian rune poem, as they've been called, developed around about the same time that the younger Futhark started being used in Norway and Denmark and Scandinavia. And it developed either in Frisia or in England. So it's called the Anglo-Saxon runes. Sometimes it's called the Frisian runes. And at this time, it moved away from the Elder Futhark, which is what most people use as a divination system, and gave us these enigmatic poems which have deep meaning that lead us to wonder what the actual meaning and deeper esoteric association of these runes could be. So the Anglo-Saxon rune poem gives a definition for wealth, and it says of the first letter, fjö, wealth or cattle.
Fjö beth fora fira gechwelkum, skjal de mana gechwelk miklenheid dalen, gif he weil for drietne doms glauten.
Wealth is a comfort to all men, yet every man must bestow it freely if he wishes to gain honour in the sight of the Lord. So these riddles kind of make us look for deeper meanings in the meaning of the words. The meaning of wealth here is not to have wealth stashed away, have it stowed somewhere where it's not accessible, to hoard it, to keep it secret, to hide it in some place and to see it accumulate. We are told that to think about wealth, we are to see it as something that can be shared among men, that is only worthy if it is used to help your community, to bring you honour by your generosity, to show your good heart and your benevolence. So here we are being given a riddle to help us understand a deeper meaning of a certain word. Now, the next rune in the Anglo-Saxon rune poem is which means auroch. And here we are told that the auroch is a wild beast that is untamable but proud. It has great strength, and many people see this as a warrior rune, sort of a great power and strength behind it.
Beth anmod und overhjønnet, felle frekned jo, fjotter mit haunem, me mustapa, that is moderhut.
However, if you look at the Icelandic rune poem, we find that the meaning of is entirely different. And here means rain. And it says of lamentation of the clouds, and ruin of the hay harvest, and abomination of the shepherd. So here we think of a different root of the meaning of this rune, which is a kind of sad destruction that happens to the glorious summer, to the beautiful weather, to the hay harvest, to the crops, and to the abundance. So if we look at these two rune poems side by side, we may gain a different meaning, which is somewhat a destructive meaning, somehow a force that has wreaked havoc on the beneficial order of life. So here we are being asked to think about the deeper meaning of the runes through these rune poems. Now there are 3 rune poems. There is the Anglo-Saxon rune poem, which was written about the 8th or 9th century. Then there are the later Icelandic and Norwegian rune poems, which are based on the less letters of the Futhark, and so we generally refer to the Anglo-Saxon rune poem to gain meaning of more runes. Now the Anglo-Saxon rune poem also has different vowel sounds added to it, and these have meanings that are not in the original Futhark. So we have the meaning of an ash and an oak. We have the meaning of a grave and of a yew tree. So there are other added elements in the Anglo-Saxon rune poem that don't generally get recognised in our modern psyches, in our modern understanding of rune magic. So do we have any real evidence that the runes were actually used magically and mysteriously in a historical context? Well, one of the big clues we have is the word itself, Rune, which means a secret or a whisper. There's a deeper meaning of a mystery, a revelation. Rune means some kind of esoteric knowledge that may not be spoken, that brings about enlightenment, it brings about transformation. So we translate it roughly as a whisper or a secret, but it also has these other added layers of mystery and esoteric knowledge. So this tells us that the rune itself is not just about a written symbol, it is about the sound that that letter makes, that spoken word creates. So this is the first sign that there is something more to the runic alphabet than just a writing system. So we have a limited number of runic inscriptions. A lot of them come from Norway and Denmark. We have a few left in England. And from these, most are commemorative, and they're written on gravestones. And they tend to say this stone was put up here by so-and-so in remembrance of so-and-so and was written by so-and-so. And these seem to be straightforward runic scripts. It was also quite common use to combine both Latin and runic words in the same commemorative dedication, in the same piece of writing. A good example of this is on the Frank's casket, which is mainly in runic script but has a few Latin words. It was quite common then to write both runic script and Latin script together. However, this practice was banned around about the 11th century by King Canute, and he forbade the use of writing in runes. Now, it's possible that the church banned this use of runic writing precisely because of its association with magical practices and with creating spells and charms. We don't know for sure why they did this. It seems likely that the church disliked the use of runes for some reason, and they banned it in favour of the Latin script. However, in Germany, they carried on with what was called a Gothic alphabet, which was a combination of runic, Latin and Greek letters. And this was used in Germany until about the 13th, 14th century, I think. So, although we didn't use them anymore in England, the runes did continue quite late on into the medieval periods. What else we know about the use of runes comes from these inscriptions that we have found on artifacts. Now, Some of these inscriptions seem to make very little sense to us. And we have strange inscriptions with repetitions of a rune that make no known words. They cannot be translated into any word or sentence, which would seem to indicate that there was something else going on here other than just pure writing. So it's been said that some of the inscriptions were what we call charm words, and they were used for their magical practice, for their magical power. So one of these charm words would seem to be the word alu, and this was often put on cremation urns. Now, the manner in which it was put on a cremation urn and on which the urn was placed in the ground led us to believe that this was a magical word. It was often written in mirror script, in mirror runes, which would reflect the runes either side of a central stave. And a good example of these can be found at Spong Hill in cremation urns there. And these cremation urns were stamped with this charm word alu, and the charm word would be laid face down on the ground so that it would seem it was not for human eyes to see, but for the gods or for the land spirit or for some kind of magical significance. Now, the word alu is quite strange. It translates as ale, but it would seem to have great magical significance and a magical association with ale. Now, we know of ale that it's a beer, and often in the alpha blots there is a record of them holding an alpha blot when they were disturbed, and they sent to the door what were called beer men. So from this description we can understand that the act of pouring beer or consuming beer or having some initiatory practice that involved beer was a sacred part of Norse magic and Norse ceremony. The word ale may refer to beer, it may refer to an intoxicating liquid, but it could also refer to root words that mean temple or hallowed or taboo, such as the Proto-Germanic word alu, which means amulet or taboo, which is derived from the word al, which means to protect. This word is also linked to the Old English word ale, which means hall or temple. Also to the Gothic Arls, which means temple, or to the Old Norse al, which means amulet. So wrapped up in this word ale is not only an intoxicating beverage, but other associations with amulets, with protection, and with holy temples. Now, the word ale is made up of the runes Ansus, Lagu and Uruz, and these individually may have significance too. Now, there are many charm words that can be found on bracelets, and these are amulets that were worn around the neck in the form of a medallion kind of gold coin, and often these have runic charm words on them. So one bracelet from Sigurdrifumal in Jutland has the charm Lauk as Alu on it. So this combines with another charm word which is Lauk, and this is a term that has been thought to associate with the leek, which is Lauker. Now, the word leek is often seen on these charms too, and the leek was considered protective and magical. In fact, the leek had great significance in Norse thought. There is a story of how the leek can turn away any poison that had been added to a drink. So you would draw protective runes on your nails and on the cup, and then you would put a leek in the drink, and this would help you to avoid any poison or any evil or treachery. So the leek was an incredibly protective, magical vegetable, and it was a leek or a garlic, and it was also used medicinally to help heal and turn away poison too. So this was probably its association. It was also associated with potency and virility. So the leek was considered very magical as a charm word, and these can often be found on bracteates too. Now, one of the other words that can be found on these bracteates was lathu, and lathu means an invitation. So lathu was found on bracteates and was said to mean an invocation to invite in higher spiritual forces, supernatural powers, and help and aid from the gods and from the spirits. So a fourth charm word that was often found on bracteates was auja, and auja meant hail or good luck. So bracteates were often inscribed with the word gibu auja, which meant I bring good luck or I bring protection. So these charms were definitely charmed with writing to invoke their magical powers in luck and protection. Now on the Kragenhul spear shaft we find the absolute gobbledygook runic inscription of G-A-G-A-G-A combined in a bind rune and repeated 3 times. Now this spells out the word gaga, which makes no sense. In fact, it spells out the word gagaga, which is not a word, so there must be something else going on here when they put letters, especially repetition of letters, on certain items. And it's thought that the repetition of G-A-G-A-G-A meant Gibu Auja 3 times. So this was a particularly powerful and magical term to use for protection as well. But how do we know that we are interpreting these things correctly? Many of the runes are hardly legible, many parts are missing. We may not understand exactly what we're reading. We may be interpreting things with our own presumptions, really. Also, the presumption that runes were not used magically is a fairly innocuous, considering these strange symbols that seem to make no logical sense. So the question is, what can we really tell? Do we have any historical sources? What else can we refer to when it comes to understanding how runes were used and whether they were used magically? So in Egil Skallagrimsson's saga, we are told that the runes have been used badly by someone who is not well versed in rune magic, and that this mistake in carving runes has in fact caused sickness in a young girl. A rune stave is found underneath her bed, at which the skald Egil Skallagrimsson slaps his head and says, you know, this is terrible rune magic, who let you do this? It was not written by an Erila or an Erilaz, who is a rune magician who knows well his arts, and instead he has caused damage and sickness to a young girl who might die. The runes were written in order to charm this young lady to fall in love, but instead Egil Skallagrimsson has to rewrite runes, and I think he carves off the runes that have already been scratched. He has to destroy them and then rewrite a spell to bring healing and well-being back to this girl. So this is a cautionary tale about the wrong use of rune magic. We also have a later medieval ballad of the knight Stig's runes on wedding, where it says that the knight Stig has fallen in love with the young maiden Kirsten, and so he writes a rune staff which he intends to wave under her skirt to make this young girl fall in love with him. Unfortunately, the rune staff rolls under somebody else's skirt and she falls in love with him, and so he has to marry this other lady instead of Kirsten, his actual love. So here we have many cautions about using runes on rune magic, haphazardly and without knowledge and care. So in the Poetic Edda we also have Sigurdrifumal, which tells of the Valkyrie Sigurdrifa, who tells of the magical use of runes. And she says, "Victory runes should you know. If you want to have victory, carve them on your sword's hilt, some on the sheath and some on the blade, and then name Tiwaz 2 times." So here we are told that to carve magical runes on your sword and on your battle implements will bring you victory in battle. Now, this poem in the Poetic Edda says quite a lot about the magical use of runes, but actually we do have some physical evidence that this is not just storytelling, because we have a couple of sword pommels that have got the rune Tia scratched into them, which means that we can be fairly conclusively sure that this rune magic was used in everyday use and it's not just some kind of poetic story that has come down to us. In fact, there are quite a lot of sword pommels and spearheads that seem to be charged with magical runes. So the whole poem of Sigurdrifumal is quite significant, where Sigurdrifa instructs Sigurd in rune magic, and it's worth reading this out. So Sigurdrifa tells him, "Beer I bring thee, tree of battle, mingled of strength and mighty fame. Charms it holds, and healing signs, spells full good, and gladness runes. Winning runes learn if thou longest to win, and the runes on thy sword hilt write, some on the furrow, and some on the flat, and twice shall thy call on tear. Ale runes learn, that with lies, the wife of another, betray not thy trust. On the horn thou shalt write, and on the back of hands, and need shall mark on thy nails, and thou shalt bless the draught and danger escape, and cast a leak into the cup. For so I know thou shalt never see thy mead with evil mixed." And this story is also mentioned in the Volsunga saga, where a person avoids poison by his host by writing the need neath rune on his nails and charming the ale that is brought to him that has been poisoned. The verse goes on. "Birth runes learn if help you would lend, the baby from the mother to bring. On thy palms shalt write them, and round thy joints, and ask the fates to aid. Wave runes learn if well thou wouldst shelter the sail steeds out on the sea. On the stem shalt thou write, and the steering blade, and burn them into the oars. Though high shall be the breakers, and black the waves, thou shalt safe the harbour seek. Branch runes learn, if a healer wouldst be, and cure for runes would work. On the bark shalt thou write, and on the trees that be with boughs to the eastward bent. And this refers to using healing runes by cutting runes onto the bark of a tree to transfer the illness from the person into the tree. The poem goes on. Speech runes learn, that none may seek to answer harm with hate. Well he winds and weaves them all, and sets them side by side, at the judgment place, when justice there the folk shall fairly win. Thought runes learn, if all shall think, thou keenest mind of men. Here the poem is lost a little, and although it goes on, I think the first 12 stanzas give us quite a lot of information about the magical use of runes and how this was taught to others and how they were practiced. So we were told here plainly that runes were used for sorcery and magic. We also have the evidence of these runes being used in objects such as charms and talismans and amulets. We also have the evidence of later Icelandic magical staves. Now, because these are recorded quite late on in the medieval era, it was considered that the magical use of runes was quite a late development, something that was reinvented or taken and sort of steered in another direction, and had no bearing on the original use of runes. But I think we can probably surmise that bind runes were being used magically, and although we have no recordings of them, there is no reason to suppose that they were not developing things like magical staves and magical symbols, using runes to bring victory in battle, to bring power and to bring protection and good forces to their aid. There was the art of a magical writing of rune, a rune craft that could be passed on to a magician, to one who was learned in these skills and in these ways. A runera or an erila or an erilaz, who was someone who was skilled in magically writing runes for their power and effects. It would seem that generally people were quite literary in the Viking Age, in the Norse Age. There was quite a lot of literacy later on in that age, so normal everyday people could write with runes, although, as these cautionary tales tell us, there was a skill in using runes correctly that was not widespread, unknown commonly among people. So it was quite a skilled gift that had to be used with caution. So thank you for listening. I hope you gained something from that. If there's any way that you can use these runes in your own magic, I personally really like to use runes on candle magic and on candle spells. But remember that the word rune actually means a secret and a whisper. So using the runes as writing may not be enough in itself. The sound and the galder of this rune may be a part of the magical incantation that activates the magic powers or brings about the desired result. So thank you for listening. If you like this, please like and subscribe, and please give me any comments in the box below about how you might use runes, or if you've used runes, how you found that. Did that work out for you? Did you find some especially powerful result from using runes magically? Or perhaps you were cautioned not to use them without sufficient knowledge. I'd love to know your stories, so yeah, let me know in the comments box below, and yeah, Thanks for listening. I hope to speak to you all again soon. Cheers. Bye.